Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional from the world of fintech, an author from Iowa, USA, Steve Walsh. Steve,
Thanks.
welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank
You
you.
know, I always get the chance to talk to other entrepreneurs, and it's
Uh-huh.
always to get the great. It's always great energy. And what you're doing. I love what the brand called You. I mean, it's a
Thank you.
great name to work with.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Steve is the founder of Bison Equity Group, which is dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs and investors in achieving success with high potential companies. He's also an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled Make the 10X Leap. So, Steve, before we start talking about all the work you are doing in the world of finance and fintech and your book, when you look back at your earliest ventures, what first sparked your attraction to entrepreneurship rather than a traditional career path?
I think as a kid, I started as a kid. I was an entrepreneur as a kid, and that's where it started. I
Mm-hmm.
was an investor, but I was also an entrepreneur. I mean, one of the things is how to put myself through college. I looked at things like I worked on motorcycles,
Mm-hmm.
and I would buy them, fix them up, and sell them. And
Mm.
kind of my start of my entrepreneurship. And then also investing. I looked at ways to, you know, increase my wealth, and that was the way I looked at it, is doing a lot of reading. I was an avid reader when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
so that was the thing that really helped me too along the way.
And what would you say was a pivotal moment that convinced you to start Bison Equity Group?
Uh, you know, I was seeing, as an investor, I saw a lot of the things that entrepreneurs were running into.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. There was always those same problems that they were running into. And it was a lot of times they were looking for capital, but the other thing is too, they were also looking for ways to grow their company. They knew they could do more, but they really didn't have the tools.
Mm.
And one of the things when I started Bison Equity Group, that was one of the things I could do, is bring the tools to these entrepreneurs, that wanted to 10x their company. And
Mm.
that was the pivotal moment when I looked at some of these companies and investing in them and seeing what they were missing.
Mm. Fascinating. Let's talk about the work that you're doing in the Bison Equity Group, and you talk about the 3C investment lens, which is clarity, confidence, and clairvoyance. My first question is, how do you help founders move from a broad vision to crystal clear investment thesis?
Yeah, so the one thing I look at is I bring something that a lot of times entrepreneurs are so ingrained in the business themselves.
Mm.
It's hard for them to look outside.
Mm.
It's hard to see a bigger picture. And so I bring that bigger picture to them.
Mm.
I get something, I always say that if they're saying it at 10 million, why can't they do 50 million?
Mm.
And so I look at it as, and then from there I work at, if we're at, let's say we're going to go to 50 million or 100 million,
Mhm.
work backwards from there and to
Mm.
see what we need to do to get to that level. And I think that's my thing, is bringing in not only capital, but people, systems, and along with the capital on top of that. And the one thing I'd say is the marketing. A lot of these founders, they've been doing the same thing. The marketing is probably a key point of I guess a sticking point sometimes with a lot of
Mm.
founders, that
Mm.
they've created a great widget or a great service, but they don't know how to get it out to the people. Uh,
Mm.
that's where I'd say is the other thing is, along with the ideas, the bigger, looking forward, looking at something that's bigger than they are.
Mm.
Uh, how do we get it out there and into the world? And I think that's when it comes to, I usually see something faster than they do. And so that's where I bring the value to them.
Very interesting. And many early stage founders waver when their stakes rise. How do you coach them to build authentic evidence-based confidence?
Man, that's a lot of things. I say it comes obviously within, and it's a lot of, I never was never wanted to be a coach, but that was one thing I started doing a lot of. Is a lot of times entrepreneurs, they may have the confidence or they may have an ego that's needs to be tamed,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. Um, and so I look at it as, how can I see what they see, but also see something in a bigger picture for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that is when I'm doing this, working with them on this coaching, what is it they need? What are the tools? Where are they at in the journey? Are they doing, what are they doing for their health? That's the other thing is too, I look at is, are they doing some of the things that they should be doing for their health along with the business? Because I believe that health and business are one and the same. And when it comes to when you're doing things like meditation, I believe, and what are they doing to work on themselves? And along with that is, what is their culture like at the business? And so it's a lot of times working with not just them at work, but also what's their home life like.
Very interesting. Thank you. Let's talk about the 3 C's now. And my first question is about the first C, which is, how can investors apply the clarity principle when they're evaluating their portfolios?
Yeah, I look at it as, when you look at clarity, it's what types of things are you looking at to really get the clarity? I kind of give you an example.
Yeah.
A group of investors bring me into a company, and they were kind of struggling with the founder, not sure what was going on. And so I came in and to give them clarity, the clarity of what they were lacking on, what they were seeing with this founder. And a lot of times I bring in look at the company, not only just the company itself, but also the founders that are running the company. And so I do some tests. I have some tests that I use that I do to see what type of founder they are. And that gives the clarity that they need to decide if it's going to be a worthwhile investment. They brought me in after the fact, not before. And the problem was, it was the founder that was the problem. He was not willing to get out of his own way. And it was really stunning the growth of the company. And not all founders are like that. I think a lot of times founders, that they can be more of a growth mindset or willing to listen. And this was the founder that was struggling with that. And so after that clarity that they needed, the investors needed, was the founder itself. What was he able to get to the next level? And they had some problems, and what they end up doing is they end up selling the company. They had a small gain, but it could have been a lot bigger gain than that.
Yeah. Well said. Let's talk about the second C. How does confidence differ from sheer optimism? And why does that distinction matter to investors?
A lot of times with investors, when you really have to be confident that the founder, the company itself, the direction it's going, a lot of the things that put together a company. And also on top of that is the marketplace. Is the marketplace really want this company to, is it something that can grow? Everybody right now is looking at AI as the magic bullet.
Yeah.
And a lot of these companies, I say that it's going to be the relationships a lot of times, not so much the AI piece, but the relationships they build to really get their company to the next level. And so it has to be the confidence that they understand. One, they understand what the company's doing, the direction it's going, and confident with the founders themselves.
Amazing. The third C is clairvoyance. You define this as the ability to anticipate market shifts. Which tools or frameworks help founders sharpen this foresight?
Now, this one's a little harder because a lot of times it's like a muscle. A lot of times they need to grow that, and it's either from their past experiences. I always say it comes from their past experiences. Is it that they can see farther than most other people can? A good example would be Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was able to see the marketplace way before everybody else could.
Right.
And if you look at a lot of founders that are able to do that, it's a strong, but it's something that they need to continually. And that's where I'd say the clairvoyance comes into play. I personally, when I work with companies, I try to do is look so much farther ahead for them to see what is potential. A lot of times companies, they get to this pigeonhole where they're doing one thing, but reality is that they may need to do is a pivot. And so I look at it as, how can I bring that clairvoyance to them and then work with that founder to see something farther than they've seen in the past.
Amazing. And let me put all the three C's together and ask you, how does the 3C lens guide capital raising strategy, especially during an uncertain economic cycle?
The thing is, cycles come and go.
Yeah.
And the one thing I would say about cycles is, if you can go work in any cycle, I believe that it doesn't matter if it's an investor or if it's an entrepreneur. If you can do the things that you're strong in any cycle, it doesn't matter. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of times investors and entrepreneurs, they struggle with. They tend to do this thing where we have a bad economy. Well, it's the economy's fault. Not in reality is it doesn't really matter. You can make money in any, and as an investor, I always say you can make money in any economy. It doesn't.
Correct.
And so that's where I look at is when working with entrepreneurs, I put on the same lens. And it is in those, even in those bad economies, actually a lot of times they shine even better.
Amazing.
Because they do a lot of the things that a lot of their competitors are not doing.
Wow.
I go back to like when you're looking at a company and the marketing, a lot of times companies pull back on marketing when the economy's bad or it slows down. I always say push through, do more marketing, do a lot more, because competitors not, and it's a great opportunity to take market share.
But based on the work that you do with so many entrepreneurs, have you come across any misconceptions they would have about the 3C framework? And if yes, how do you correct it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the case. I mean, a lot of times it's, I think the biggest thing is a lot of entrepreneurs or investors, they always say we're different, or the economy's not doing great, or a lot of the things that they keep on telling themselves. It's that self-doubts a lot of times, or it's that that belief that that they're different, they can't do it, our competitors beating us, all the things that they tell themselves. So what I do is I basically cut through the crap and work with them on trying to get to the next level and say, that's just a story in your head. You need to move forward past that story.
And what would be your view about how an investor or a board member can use the 3C framework to add constructive pressure without micromanaging?
And that can be, some ways it can be, um, if you're micromanaging, the CEO especially,
Mm,
uh, you got to be really careful because that's that fine line of saying, hey, you know, maybe this way is better than the other.
hmm
It's always good to make suggestions, but you don't expect them to always take those suggestions.
mm,
I think it's a lot of times if the CEO has the learning mindset, that he can take some constructive suggestions and work with that. Maybe it's one idea, maybe it's just a concept they could bring away from that meeting. And that's the way I look at it as too, is a lot of entrepreneurs are afraid sometimes to do anything different
mm.
because either the board, they maybe have put some constraints on them. I've seen that happen, and it's never good. I mean, it's a lot of times that the entrepreneurs has that board,
Hmm.
and that board is made up with business owners. Hopefully, they're all business owners.
Yeah.
And the
Mm,
one thing I would look at is, um, take that constructive, those ideas that they have given you,
mm,
and maybe make them your own.
mm.
That's
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. Great response. One more question relating to investments and entrepreneurship, and then some few questions for your book. Steve, if you could give your younger entrepreneurial self a single piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Mm. The one thing I would tell myself is take more risks.
Okay.
The one I would look at is don't be afraid to fail.
Hmm.
I think as a young entrepreneur,
Hmm.
a lot of times they do that. They failed at one time, and
Yeah.
it kind of sometimes gives them um, a bad taste. And
Hmm.
I say that fail forward, fail. Especially when you're young. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great to do that, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs, especially young ones,
Hmm.
they do that once. When they fail, it's a bad feeling, but really, in reality, it should be one of the best things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great advice. Let's now talk about your book, Steve, Make the 10x Leap. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Steve Walsh's book. I'm going to do the same. Tell me about your book and what inspired you to coin the phrase the prolonged stall, and how prevalent is it among growth stage companies?
A lot of times, it's not. It's interesting. You see a lot of entrepreneurs. They kind of get to this level where they're very comfortable.
Hmm.
But they're doing a lot of things that they've been doing the same thing over and over, and maybe they've been working 80 hours a week. They haven't been seeing their family. They've been doing a lot of the things, and they're afraid to get outside their comfort zone, meaning they need to hire more people. They need to hire um, the different marketing person, a lot of the
Hmm.
things, or maybe they need to hire um, a completely different team.
Hmm.
Maybe they're working with is they're at this level and they're trying to get to the next level.
Hmm.
Their team isn't willing to do that. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times they do that prolonged stall where they're seeing, they see potential, but they just are comfortable where they're at. And so,
Hmm.
and they continually tell themselves the same thing that, you know, they don't have enough money. They don't they can't do the marketing, all the things that they tell themselves.
Hmm. Amazing.
Their company's different.
Yeah.
It's all.
Yeah. Yeah. My next question is that your book emphasizes raising the right capital. In practical terms, what distinguishes right capital from wrong capital at different stages of a business?
So the right capital is sometimes entrepreneur. Well, a couple things. Sometimes entrepreneurs will get a lot of capital if they're a convincing company up front, and all of a sudden investors expect them to put that in place.
Hmm.
problem is a lot of times they'll spend it on things that they shouldn't be spending it on. If they don't have some sort of investment plan in place, they potentially could do is churn through the capital without getting any traction. The other thing is smart capital. A lot of times they bring in investors just because they want the capital. They don't really look at the investor as much as they want.
Yeah.
And the problem is the investor it can make a big difference. Way that, let's say they're not moving fast enough, or they're not going the direction the investor wants them to go. A lot of times you'll have that investor a thorn in their side, and that can be a problem. Or this is a growth company, and the investor wants an income, and completely different way of looking at the company. You know, their growth and investor wants income, so that's complete doesn't work. I mean, you really have to do is when you look at investors, interview the investor just like you would interview a employee. If it's somebody that you want to work with, do they understand what you want to do? Do they understand the direction you want to go? Are they on board with that?
Yeah.
Or did they have a different direction?
Amazing. I have time for two more questions.
Yeah.
How do you guide founders to align team culture with aggressive scaling goals without burning out?
Oh boy. You know, that's the thing. I look at if you have two founders, it's really good to have two, because one is that visionary and one's that implementer. And it's great to have that, because when you bring in two founders like that, they really work. You can see how well they work together. That burnout, you work out with both of the founders like that. Their skill set, they bring in a different skill set. So when you're bringing in culture, you can create a great culture, especially if there's two founders.
Yeah,
they still have to be on. They have to be on board. They have to be in sync. But I believe that it starts with how the values of the founder, what do they want this company to be like, and you'll try. If it's kind of like if you create a team culture. I mean, you're going to team that you want.
That's it. And my last question for you, Steve. What would you say are the first 3 steps a reader of your book should take after finishing your book to kickstart a 10x trajectory?
You know, it's one thing is to look at your company the way it is. I would say try to look at your company from the outside. Really do is a lot of entrepreneurs have a hard time with this, is that they're so far ingrained in the company. They can't look at outside. But that is the one thing. And the one thing I'd say is do it someplace else. Don't do it in your office. Do it someplace else, and really decide where you want to take this company. What does your 10x look like? Because everybody's 10x is different.
Correct.
And so what does that mean for you? Is that 10x? Is it going to be more time with your, maybe it's more time outside. But look at what your 10x is, and then see if your team is on board with that. I think the biggest thing is a lot of times is communication, lack of communication inside the company. And that starts from looking at a company and seeing where your problem areas are, your bottom. But if you can the other thing is too, if you can get somebody from the outside helping you look in. I always say coaches, mentors are great to have. You don't have a mentor or a coach, that's the best thing to have, because if they've done it already, and so if you can bring that in, that really will open your eyes up to what is possible.
Amazing. And on that note, and your amazing piece of advice, look at your company from the outside. I think it is so powerful. Most entrepreneurs or founders don't even think about stepping outside themselves to
Right.
see what their 10x looks like. Thank you, Steve, for talking to me about your three C's. I think we covered some very interesting ground on entrepreneurship. And thank you also for talking to me about your book, Make the 10x Leap. Thank you for
It's great.
speaking to me, and good luck.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Thank
It's
you.
great.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.